I just want to see things as they are. I don't want to be making up shit and, being like, I'm a genius, we're all geniuses or whatever. I want to see, because I think when you see the thing as it actually is, then you can do some stuff with it.
And grow.
Yeah, yes. And grow, right, yes. Exactly, and grow. I believe in growing, totally. I really believe in it.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Maria Dizzia is an actor. She sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work.
Is there a typical way that you like to begin your preparation process when you get a new role? Is there a typical first step?
Yeah, I don't know if I ever get to actually do it all the time, but I know my impulse for a first step is always to interview someone that I think either has the job of the character that I'm going to do or is in the situation, because, but I don't always get to do that. So there's a part that I'm going to do in a couple of weeks, and I asked, they have a very specific job that is a little like, I don't know, like gate kept, Mm-hmm. And so I asked the production if they had, if they had any inroads with people already, and if I could speak with someone. They said yes, but then I haven't heard back, and so I suspect that I'm going to end up on set without having gotten to speak with someone. Mm-hmm. So that does happen sometimes, but that's my first impulse all the time, and I think part of it is because when an early job that I had, that's still one of my favorite jobs that I had, is in the play Pullman Car Hiawatha by Thornton Wilder. And I played the part that that's a version of Our Town. The Pullman Car Hiawatha was him playing with this idea of a person dying and then coming back and saying how grateful and how they didn't realize what life was actually like. And I've actually forgotten that character's name, but it's who becomes Emily in Our Town. Mm-hmm. And this character dies of a heart attack, or some pulmonary event or whatever, right? And then is walking through the car and talking about how she didn't see life clearly. And my father had a heart attack when he was 42, and I never talked to him about. I always very much dealt with my relationship to it was as his daughter, and I felt I knew everything about it from my perspective. And then when I was cast in that part, I thought I wanted to ask my dad what it was like to, if he felt like he was dying and what happened. And I asked him, and I said, what did you think you were dying? And he said, yes. And I said, what did you feel? And he said, angry. And I was so surprised that was his answer. And I was like, oh, angry, why? And he said, because I felt like my body had failed me, that I had failed my family. He said, I thought, wow, I really put these people in an impossible situation. He was like, what are my wife and my daughters going to do? And he was mad about it. And I also think that was like his life force, right? Yeah. That was like fighting against this thing. But it was so helpful to me because that was just something I would have never thought of. I just wouldn't have. And because that monologue in particular is so much about like softness and gratitude, it was just so great for me to get to think about, to find where she was angry. Yeah. And so I really don't think if I hadn't spoken to my father about that I wouldn't have been looking for it. Now I know later as an actor and something that when I teach that I talk to people about all the time is looking for opposites, and there are like really silly things that you could do in order to look for opposites, in terms of like you do the scene the way that it occurs to you, and then you just do the scene in the opposite way once. Mm-hmm. And in some way that's such like a silly, rote kind of thing to do. On the other hand, it like breaks us out of a pattern, because a lot of time as actors, or anyone, I think, who's pursuing, any artist, I think about, painters also, because now, social media is terrifying. But one of the things that's nice, I think, is you get to see little clips of documentaries about visual artists. Yeah. That's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things on Instagram. But for the most part, right, an artist is like slowly working towards a thing.
Yeah.
You're not actively going in the opposite direction.
Right.
I think you kind of have to make that. You can stumble on it, I think, but then I think it's something that I think over time you have to make a conscious part of your process to be like, well, what if it's the opposite?
Yeah.
Which is important in your pursuit of finding as many angles of something as possible.
And in that presentation of the opposite, you're breaking yourself out of the habit of thinking of this has to be right.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
But then there'll be stuff in there though that is actually more, quote, right.
Yeah.
That you didn't think to even present.
Right, exactly. Like being more dynamic and more alive.
Yeah. Like, let's just say though that your dad had said, "Oh, I was profoundly sad."
Yes, right, exactly.
Which is not surprising, right? Or not shocking as saying angry.
Yeah.
Is it that you just needed someone who went through it to confirm a truth?
Yes.
And then you can then proceed
completely.
with confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what that is?
I think it's very, very much what it is. Is like looking for the truth of the thing in order to feel that you could ground yourself. And that's not to say, like, I'm definitely one of those people who really believes that your imagination is so much more interesting than just like slavishly recreating the truth. But a lot of times, sometimes like when we talk about like slavish recreation of something, it's not about an interior life, it's about the exterior. It's like what the aesthetics of what we think an angry face looks like, or a happy, or the aesthetics of how we think an emotion gets expressed. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so if he had said I was profoundly sad and grateful for the life, I would have asked him for specifics, you know, about like, and what was it in particular that was making you sad, so that I could start to understand, and that it's not like just general, like loss of life, but it's like, was there something in particular that was upsetting you, you know?
Yes. Because it's also those particulars that you can then use as material.
And then when you have something, I think one of the things that's so important about specificity is that you can extrapolate from that.
Yes.
Is that you can't extrapolate from a general thing. Yes. Like, you're sad. Well, what is that like for me? You know, you can't move from that. But something very specific is a place that you can extrapolate. If you ask, why were you sad? They said, because. If the person says, because there were things that I wanted to finish that I didn't get to finish.
Yes.
There are things that, you know, now you're starting to be like, okay, well, I know what that's like.
Yes.
Of having unfinished work, you know, and that is a fruitful place for your imagination to jump off of.
Yes.
And then you don't need to like check in with them anymore. Now you're in touch with something that is very recognizable to you and that you can imagine and fantasize about, right? In the way in which you can't imagine on the prompt.
Right.
Sad.
Right.
You know.
You are in a very different place right now than you were when you started acting, right? Can you, for a second, just talk about what you thought this was all about back then, that you know now it's not about that, and maybe just talk a little bit about how that happened. It's such an unfair question.
No. The first thing that pops up is I really thought the job of the actor was to be right. I thought it was, throughout the whole thing, I thought it was to be right. You know, some of that language, are you right for the part? You know, I'm right for this part, that kind of thing of, you know, feeling like I look like this, so therefore I should be able to inhabit this thing, or I feel this in my experience, so let me try to make the outside conform to what I think other people's expectations of that thing are. You know, like I had a bra that I used to call my equity bra because it had so much padding in it, you know. And I was like, I think this is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I think this is what you're expecting. But I think the place where it really got me in trouble was I thought it was my job to be right in rehearsal, which I think really hobbled me in rehearsal. And I thought it was then my job, after like going through that meat grinder of rehearsals where you're trying to be perfect and then the director is trying to make you more perfect in their own way, then I thought it was my job to be right in every performance.
Yeah.
You know, and I did, you know, and what I think what I was really lucky about was not that got me anywhere at all, really, but that there were cracks in it. And it was when in those cracks that I actually got opportunities and that things happened. And I remember a lot of them. You know, like one was an audition where I you know, it was like I like wasn't watching myself so much, and I was just able to respond to the reader and to the material and to like accidentally give like a really like an audition that had life in it and to get the part.
Against your better judgment or whatever, right?
Exactly, but I always remembered it. I was like, that, I want to get there again. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
What happened? You know?
Yeah.
And really it was because like probably in that meditative way, my attention was somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it was somewhere else. But so that's the thing. I could feel, like I was able to feel at least that when I was pursuing being right, it was flat and it was making me frustrated. And that when these things would happen, when I was unsuspecting, when I was tired or when I was overworked or that kind of thing, that actually things that were happening. Or if I perceived for a second that, I don't know, that day wasn't important for some reason, you know, that I was like, oh, we're just doing this. So it's not, I would recognize that all those moments when I was the most full of life and the most. And so I started to think about, I'm like, how can I get more of those things? And then it really changed when I started to direct and I realized, I was like, oh, you just need somebody to be alive. I was like, you just need somebody to be alive and just watch somebody be alive and just like judge the aliveness a little more over here, a little there, you know, and you're not as a director, I don't think, or I think if your attention, if your attention is in a fruitful place, you're not worried about whether the person's performance is right or not. You just want it to be alive because that you can work with, that you can move around and, you know, and that whole thing of like being like, once a person steps into that place of being alive, they could go anywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, and I started to realize that also, I think as an actor, that it was just to invite myself into that alive place. And then that's a lot of work, I think, you know, given, you know, like depending on what kind of day you're having and stuff like that,
Yes.
you know, and I mean, now I've like read this really great book about how emotions are made is the name of the book by this neuroscientist. And she talks about how, you know, your brain is always playing a movie and because it just takes too much calories to constantly be seeing all the time. Yeah. And one of the things I took away from that was I was like, right, that's why it's so hard to be in the present.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard as an actor to be in the present is because you're burning so many calories. Like it's so much. And that's why sometimes you have to figure out like these backdoor ways to invite yourself into being into the present. Right. And a lot of people's way is through anger. I don't know, that's just something I've noticed. You know, a lot of people, that's the first way.
Yeah.
Is to be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, you know what? And now I see you.
Yeah.
Because you can go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
You know, but a lot of actors do work that way.
Yeah.
They get mad first and then they're in the present and then they can do anything.
That's so interesting.
You know, they can be charming and light and vulnerable.
Yes.
But that the first thing is that sharpness of like.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it interesting that being alive is actually, it's the hardest thing though, in a way. Yeah. Right?
I totally agree.
Because so much you can go and pay a lot of money to see people that aren't alive and they're getting paid.
Yeah.
And people are okay with it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when you see someone who's alive, you're like, whoa, why can't it always be like that?
Right.
So it's actually kind of rare.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, are there practical ways to get alive?
Right. I don't know if I have the answer to that. I do know that I do think that like sharing a performance or a story with someone else, that you do communicate on a lot of different levels. That I actually don't think it's only aliveness. I think the aliveness is really special and makes the information go in deeper and makes people feel like elevates things into a place of feeling like things are, you know, maybe getting, I hate to use the word, but maybe getting like sacred or something, you know, when something alive is happening. What I think happens is your aliveness visits you whenever it wants to when you're in the rehearsal process, right? You're pursuing your stuff of like trying to figure out what your perspective is, you know, what this story is that we're all telling together. And the aliveness like visits you. And in those moments of aliveness, you learn things that then you can make a conscious part of your performance. So then I think that when you're performing, then you can do those conscious things. And it's like, even if it doesn't come and visit you on the day, we still have these little like artifacts that make the thing worth watching. I do feel like what you want is to be enacting those little things, and they're supposed to be like invoking the aliveness in some way. Like, remember, like do and do these things, and then, you know, and then it'll come again and take you in yet another direction. But so I'm thinking, you know, in terms of theater, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you're just left doing the things that you discovered, which is not to say that you're copying. You're not like repeating. I don't think it's repeating. There's something different than saying like, this is how I do it. It's these other little discoveries of like, oh, what a person's actually thinking about when they say this, right? I'm not talking about like making faces and gestures. It's like, I talked about this with Sarah Rules. I do feel that like when you're in rehearsal, you're kind of like making a poem as an actor. You know, it's like you make this poem of like, these are the things that I'm recognizing about where the character's attention really is, or what their feelings are really coming from. But then what's so exciting is then you have another real moment and it scrambles that whole thing up again. Yeah. You know, because you're right. I mean, it is the realness, but it doesn't happen all the time. And so similar, you know, you're talking about film, it's like then doing takes. Yeah. You know, I think that it's about, I really think, everybody's different, so I should just talk about myself. Yes. For myself, my subconscious, there are two things. My subconscious likes to participate from the word go, but is also really skittish. So the minute someone says something, I actually think that most people are like this. From teaching, I feel like I've seen it in other people. Is that your subconscious wants to participate from the beginning. And it offers up things. It starts to give you images and thoughts and feelings right from the first thing. If someone says to you, like, the name of the story is Candy Cane Land, like, you know, you just like start filling, your head starts filling up. But then I think what happens is all of those initial impressions and thoughts and feelings we criticize them. We're like, that's dumb, that's stupid, that's not based anywhere. And once you say that to your subconscious, it gets super skittish. And then I think it takes a really long time to invite it back. That is been my experience with it. And so I feel like you have to run with those first stupid ideas that you have. And it is not about, like, I feel like that was the understanding of the actor's job is not to be right. It is to take those first offerings, whether they're good or bad, and do them. And make them, and for everybody. You know, not just for themselves, but for the director and for the writer. So everybody gets to see these things, and then we can move from there.
You're working.
Those are the materials
you should be working with. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Those are materials, not people's ideas, not people's considered things that make sense. You know. That's not helpful. It's like, no, we could do that alone in a room. We could think about what makes sense and that's not why you're here. The actor's not here for, you know what would make sense? The actor's more for like, I don't know why, but I want to lunge at that thing. Be like, okay, great, do it. And then you find out what I think is great is you do it and it's like, that's not what it is. We're not lunging at the thing. It's great. instead of being like humiliated, instead it's like, now we have a lot of information. We know what it isn't. Now we know more about what it could be and what other kinds of things we want to evoke. But I also think it's like the actor's job is like that bravery of enacting those first ideas.
Yes.
Like it's that thing is like to go and like to jump and do the stuff to like open that channel and like let the things come through.
Yes.
I don't know. I could think all these, I do all these things to like help myself think about it. Sometimes it's like, yeah, you have to, like the shitty ideas are a test in a way.
Yeah.
Sometimes like your subconscious is like, you're going to do this. Like, okay, if you do these shitty ideas, then I'll give you the really good ones. You know, like you don't get to do the good ones if you're not going to do these.
Yeah.
And I feel like I see evidence of that when I listen to actors talk. You know, like one of the things, like I saw an interview with Jessica Chastain where she said that she was doing a certain, I think when she was playing Tammy Wynette. And she said that before she would do a take, she would just like scream. And it was as a way to embarrass herself before they started rolling, so that she'd already broken through that membrane. And to me, I was like, that feels very similar to me in terms of like, you just got to jump on that train and not judge it. And then the complex, interesting, surprising things will come to you. But first, your job is to just rip through that membrane. And so I didn't do that for a long time because I thought my job was to avoid that, like for everyone.
Yes.
Like on everyone's behalf, I'm going to avoid humiliation.
Yeah.
So that the writer's not humiliated, the director's not humiliated. You know what I mean? Like you really feel, and then eventually, so the audience is not humiliated.
Right.
Like we're going to make this all very tidy. Nobody's going to get embarrassed.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're not giving anybody what they want.
Yeah, it's deadening. Right, I mean, avoiding embarrassment is just like deadening. It's just the opposite.
Yeah. Isn't it the director's job to lay this ground to do what you just said there about like playing in this unconscious, bringing up those materials rather than the materials you're talking about that we seem to think we should be playing in? Why hasn't that been done? And what do you do when it's not done?
Yeah.
To do it yourself, I guess you have to, right?
Yeah. I think most of the time you do have to do it yourself. I think that it's very rare that you find yourself in environments that people are going to do it together. I think it's very, very rare. And it's really exciting when that happens and you realize how, I think what's nice to take away from those times that when you get to be in an environment where everyone is doing it together, then when you're doing it by yourself, you're able to say, you are not as harsh on yourself because you're like, right, this is a difficult thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be trying to do this for myself in an environment where it's not being supported, then it's like, okay. Whereas I think before I used to get really hard on myself that I was like, if I couldn't deliver, that it was all me instead of being like, well, you're doing it. And, you know, there's a really, difficult circumstances to do that. And even if it's just about time.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, okay, people are telling you have a little bit of time. That's very challenging.
Yeah.
You know, instead of being like, oh, we got all day, don't worry about it. You know, which when you have, I had a great director, Ken Schmoll, is the theater director. And I remember he said something that I repeat all the time, which is he said, we have very little time, so we're going to go very, very slow. And I thought it was great. He was exactly right.
Yes.
He was exactly right. Instead of being like, all right, you guys, we got 15 minutes, so we better, we're losing the light and we got to get it all together. Instead, it's like, you know what? We're going to act like we have all the time in the world. And that's actually the only way to invite that you might actually get it done in 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly.
As if you tell people,
right.
Like, we have all the time in the world.
Right.
It's always just to take that pressure off. But what were you saying? Like, why didn't I think that's the reason why some people didn't intervene is because it is very difficult to figure out what is going on in that head. And that's what, we were talking before. I think why people can get afraid of actors sometimes is you can barely tell what's going on inside someone's head. Yeah. Is that really like anxiety can look like total stillness, like a need to be perfect can just look like the most placid thing. You don't see it. And so in some ways, I think for directors, I think you just have to assume that that's always in the environment.
Yeah.
And then take pains to minimize it.
Yes.
You know, I mean, like when I'm teaching, I always assume that the person is super stressed out, like needs to prove something to themselves, needs to prove something to, you know, the people that they're in the room with. And then sometimes, and I say that sometimes, and also, you know, I was like, you may not be feeling this way.
Yeah.
I was like, but most of the time, then people are like, no, that's how I'm feeling. Yeah. And I was like, okay. I was like, because I don't want to impose my own psychology on someone else. So I usually say it, but I'm just like, you know.
Right.
You know, but I usually make that assumption that I'm looking at somebody who, unless their performance comes out and is like incredibly free, and I'm like, oh, great, you know how to loosen that grip.
Yeah.
But otherwise, when that stuff is happening, that's what I assume is happening. Not like, because what I found myself is sometimes when I was in classes is that when you were doing the scene and it wasn't like coming out in a vibrant way, the assumption was you didn't understand the scene.
Yes.
And that, I think, is wrong.
Yeah.
Everybody gets all the scenes.
Yes.
We all know, even if you haven't read it, because we have been watching stuff forever.
Right.
We know what it wants to be.
Right.
We know what a good version of the thing feels like in our bones. We don't have to talk about what we actually need to focus on.
The problem is maybe you know it too much.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
That's
The problem is you got way too many ideas about how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things to do as a teacher is improv monologues with students, and you know, to just you do like a little bit of a conversation about what's happening in the scene, like figuring out. It's kind of like a way to talk about super objective, like what's the main thing that this person is pursuing in this scene, and then turn it into, you know, like a little sentence. You know, and then that becomes the first line of your improv monologue. And then you just talk. You just talk and talk and talk and talk. And then you start the scene. And what I love so much is that when a person is then able to allow that freedom to let go, the scene is fantastic. It's like, see, we didn't need to talk about those things. And also, like, because I think that, you know, you can talk about a scene this is what, like, if I'm going to talk about a scene and I say, look, what she's really feeling is blank. I don't think that what I'm saying that's what she's really feeling. I think that it's helpful at some point in a student's life to hear that, because I think what they're actually hearing is they think in like terms like Maggie the cat or whatever. Mm-hmm. If I say, you know, what Maggie the cat, like what Larry Moss says in his book, which is so great, is, you know, that her super objective is to get money so she can feel secure. It's, you know, that's a fantastic super objective for Maggie the cat, that what she really wants is security. That's such a humanizing thing, right? But if I say what she really wants is security to the student, I don't think that is necessarily, right? There are millions of ways to play her and things to focus on. I don't think I'm solving a problem by being like, you're not playing security, play security, and then it'll go better. I think what I'm just offering instead is like, oh, there might be something that she's not articulating that she feels. I think that's the real message that a student gets. And then your job is to figure out what is the thing for where you and Maggie come together. What is the unarticulated thing that you and she can pursue? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Yes. You know what I mean? It's not so much like, it's not. Sometimes people treat, I feel like, scene work, you know, or like taking apart a scene as like, oh, if you know these specific things, you can do it. And I don't think that's totally true. I think it's like, tell me some things just so I know that that's a possibility. But it's not that that's the only thing, right? Right. When I'm teaching, like, I talk about those things sometimes, but only that I try to couch it in a way of like, this is just to begin the conversation that you're going to continue to have with yourself. Right. But that's why I love that exercise, an improv monologue. And I'm like, we didn't talk about anything. Yeah. I'm like, we didn't say anything, and you just did it. Yeah. Because if you're present and you're listening and you're with the other person, you know, one of the things that one of my teachers, Harold Guskin, you know, talked about is like, those writers really worked on that script. Yeah. They worked on it for a really long time. Yeah. And so there are things in there that have been designed, whether it's like word choices of vowel sounds or sentences that have been designed to, if you're open to them, elicit an emotional response. Yes. you know? And so it's like, you don't have to hammer at everything in this intellectual way. You just have to make yourself available to the really great stuff that's in there.
Making yourself available
to
it.
I know, which is so fucking hard.
That's what I was just going to say. There's so many things in the way of making yourself available, right?
Yeah.
Because you're hauling in all this stuff that you think is a part of the work that isn't, that's actually harming the work. Or there's stuff about, like, the director has a totally different idea of how to get there than is the right way, or forget the word right, but the easiest way or the best way.
Right.
But it's also like,
I think I would just use the word fruitful. It's like, I don't know, it's such a dumb word, but that's the word that I've just like.
or your day that led to this time when you're coming in. All those things are stopping, allowing yourself to let in this. And it sounds like you've spent a lot of time both being that person that was struggling.
Yeah, totally.
And then being in a room as a director, trying to create the environment that would help somebody actually get there easier.
Yeah.
And then seeing what works.
Yes. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I like doing it so much, is because it's definitely, and I think that the reason why I enjoy teaching so much is because I didn't understand. Because I was laboring under so many misunderstandings and things like that, and for such a long time. And because there are things that I did not innately understand, you know. I think that a lot of actors are like that. I think that a lot of people who come to acting are people who are like, I don't get people.
Yeah.
You know, like, not someone who's like, I understand everything and I just want to, you know, some people are, I think a lot of people come to acting out of being like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so that, and I really didn't.
Yeah.
I really didn't understand people. I really didn't understand what behavior, where it came from. I didn't get any of it. And I really didn't understand play. I really didn't understand it. Something I used to think about all the time was, I remember I was in kindergarten, I did, you know, a play. And I remember the kid who I was playing opposite, Brian Campbell, I just thought he was so funny. I laughed the whole time. I was enjoying myself so much. And I think about it all the time, that I was like, you know, in this like middle place where I was really struggling. I was like, I just want to be back there where I'm just like free and laughing at how fantastic my scene partner is. But also, that's why that book was so helpful, How Emotions Are Made, is that also, like, I think sometimes, you know, people characterize it as like a fault of culture, you know, in a way of being like, and then we're taught to not do those things. Some of that is true, but some of it is, it takes a lot of calories. Like, that's what, you know, like, some of it is just like, it actually is a special place to enter, and all of human existence does not happen in that place. You know, and then it's not supposed to. You know, like, that's why I liked reading that book a lot, is that it wasn't just like, you know, it's all about oppression. Like, some of it is just the fact of being like a biological animal, you know, and all of those things just help me in order to have like because I do think that gentleness is like a real part of it, you know, because I pursued not gentleness, you know, like like, you know,
and that didn't work. So
no,
well.
it didn't work. Like, I pursued, like, you know, like mean thoughts where you're like, you idiot, you better fucking get it together, you know, like that being like your inner voice. And then also, like, literally, and I know I'm not the only actor who did this, like pinching yourself, you know, like trying to get yourself. And what's so crazy is that it's so the wrong way. Like, you could make yourself so numb. Like, I remember I gave myself these huge bruises on my thighs trying to get myself, you know, because I was so numb to it. I don't know what I could have done. In order to, you know, it's like, that's not, it's gentleness. Is the way in. But anyway, so what I just meant is that understanding that biologically it's hard to be in the present helped me in having gentleness. And not being like, no, you should be, if culture hadn't, stuck you in this box, then you would be your normal, beautiful self. And, that just, there's so much like loss and sadness and regret in that story that I find it really hard. Instead it's like, you're just a little tired being. You're an exhausted being and you need some gentleness in order to enter into this. And a lot of times the thing that you're inviting yourself into, is being open to something horrifying, something very upsetting. And so it makes sense that you need gentleness in order to be coaxed into that space. You know?
And this might be a good time to bring up this quote that you were on the great podcast with Ryan and David, the acting, the
that was
adult
so much
film
fun.
podcast.
Yeah.
And you said something interesting here. You don't have to get to the other side.
Yeah.
And by that you mean like you don't have to, overcome
Right,
self-consciousness,
exactly. You don't have to
nervousness,
overcome the thing.
Thinking too much. In order for your performance to be interesting,
Right, yeah.
you just have to be engaged with it.
Yeah.
And I think that I wrote that down because that's so interesting. And it made me think because...
And I only learned that as a teacher. Like, I didn't know that, because I didn't learn that from experience, because you can't
you're
see
seeing.
it.
You're seeing.
Right. Because when you're experiencing it, you just feel like, the feeling reminds me of like in the wake, like when you're like just in the water, like you're neither in the peaceful drowning part in the like, in the having been rescued. You're in that like shitty, it feels so horrible. But when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And what do you think is?
You're like very enjoyable.
So that to me means that what works, and when we say quote works, we mean what is engaging for the audience is this wrestling.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's not this arrival.
100%. Yeah.
So if you just wrestle, like if you have a block, and you say this, if there is a wall that you're hitting, celebrate it, because whatever the wrestling that's going to happen with this wall, that's what we want to see, right? The energy of the struggle.
And that I think it's impossible. Well, I don't know. I think, like I said, I think that a smarter person could figure it out through their experience. I couldn't. I had to see it and be in conversation with other people and see someone, after being like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm so sorry, and be like, it was fabulous. Yeah. It's great. That's all I would ever want to see on stage.
Yeah.
There's something else that I notice more, like, that I got to learn through teaching, is how it really reminds me so much of Shakespeare, and like what makes Shakespeare alive, and what Shakespeare encourages people to do, is that what we really want to see on stage is people thinking. Like, even more than, it's not so much like sometimes you think about like, oh, what we want to see is like the crying, we want to see the breakdown. It's like that comes after, you know what I mean? And we all know that sometimes that's not the most thrilling part of the performance.
Yeah.
What we'd like to see a brain lit up with thought. And Shakespeare knew that, right? I mean, Harold Bloom's great book about the invention of the human, and stuff like that. That's what we like to see, is a person thinking.
Yes.
And so, I had, and that's, what you said about like how at different points in your life, like you weren't prepared for something that a teacher said, or something that you learned. And then, so I had a teacher in grad school who was like, he said, it doesn't matter what you're thinking. He's like, think of fish. And he really meant it. He was like, just be like, bass, trout, whatever,
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what he was getting at.
Yeah.
Is that he's like, you just have to be thinking.
Yes.
It's those dead eyes.
Yes.
And just the way that it must animate, because it's interesting in the theater too, we can't see people's eyeballs, but the way in which thinking animates, the way a voice, talks and sounds when it's thinking is different than when it's reciting.
Yes.
Right? And we can just hear the aliveness gets communicated.
Yes.
This
is why when you see a great performance in like a romantic comedy and you think, wow, those people must really like each other, and then you talk to them and they hated each other. It doesn't matter. They were working in that.
It does, exactly. You just gotta have something. So something has to be going on that has effervescent, you know, in some way. Yeah, I totally agree.
So this is why if you are having...
But I also think, like, to those people's credit, frankly, is the reason why those people are good actors is because they allowed themselves to experience that anger and to be true. And there are, for every person who can do that and gives a great performance, there are people who are... like who be like unwilling to feel the hate.
Right.
And so therefore give a performance that, I'm sure we've seen those performances too, that's like dead.
Yes.
You know, because they're trying to suppress something, you know. So I think that's its own the people who are able to be open to whatever they have going, just extraordinary actors, and to trust so much and just be like, this is what I got.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's an incredible thing.
Yes. The other thing that feels so exciting that you said, I don't know, quote unquote, is a great place to start.
Yeah. Owning, being in the position of not knowing is a very open, like, curious, investigating place to be, where it's like, if I walk in this room and I'm like, oh, I know what this room is, and I'm going to start to interact with it in the way that that I think makes sense, it's not interesting. Whereas if you because what it reminds me of, like those times, like I walked on stage once for an opening night, and I was so scared that I thought the furniture was in the wrong place. And I realized what was and I was like, oh my God, they didn't even move the chairs for the thing. I was totally wrong. Everything was where it was supposed to be. And I realized why I was having that thought is because I was actually seeing stuff for the first time.
Wow.
Is that I was so scared and nervous that I was like actually finally online, and I was in the moment, and I was actually seeing where things were in relationship to each other and recognizing, instead of being in the room in my mind, which was like, yeah, the chair's here, but we're pretending there's a little bit more room and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like all that. And I think that also happens to people when something terrifying happens, right? And you suddenly, you can't see clearly.
Yes.
You don't know. Suddenly, right? Like, it's like those moments where like the ridiculousness or the weirdness of the world, comes through, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, oh, that's so crazy that we buy books and we put them on shelves for what? You know what I mean? All those things that you take for granted. Yeah. And so that's why I think it, like, so often in movies and plays, we're meeting them when their world is turning upside down. And so I think it's very valuable to be I don't know. Like, it's just such a place for like self-discovery and discovery about the world. And, we all know, like, knowing is such a shitty place to be because it just cancels out all these other possibilities.
Yes.
And so it makes us feel secure as actors, but I'm like, it's great. And I know that, I feel like I learned the value of I don't know from working with actors that I thought were really incredible and getting to see how they work. And me, I think, recognizing that was where they were all, that's something that they all had in common, is that they would all be like, I don't know, I don't, and then just allowing themselves to discover in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Watching Emma Thompson, I mean, she's just like so, I don't know, is this where this is? And what is this over here? And it is absolutely, and it's not an accident. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, and isn't that crazy that she's like, and then she gives these, incredibly incisive, beautiful, it's like, no, I'm like, I bet she works really hard to get herself into that place.
Yes.
Or has like little rituals and, even if it's just things that she says to herself to get her into that place of naivete. Yeah. So that, because she knows she's just very smart. You know what I mean? Yes. And like that. And so I started to also think that I'm like, oh, that's the thing that, like, that's the thing that we want to hone, that a person either has as like a gift that they understand immediately or something they can hone over time, is how to get yourself into that place of naivete and play.
When you direct something like what you just directed, which I didn't see idiotically. It's only like 60 seats.
That's my favorite. Theater that people haven't seen is the best, because that can really live on in your memory in a really glorious way. Just
I'm sure it's
all the plays I haven't seen, right? I
it's
mean,
amazing
Marlon Brando
in my mind.
Right, exactly. His stage performance. You know. I'm sure it was great. But anyway, the play.
This was called
Pre-existing Condition by Marin Ireland.
Yes. We're just assuming, based on hearing you talk now, that you were able to, in your best abilities, lay the environment out for the actors to be able to work and get the best out of themselves. and I'm saying to your best ability at this point in your life, right? And you could feel proud of that, and the actors responded to that. You then go and you work as an actor then in something else. I don't know what it was, or maybe it's something that's about to come up.
Yeah.
And that is not laid out for you at all, right? You're now an actor, and you don't have you as a director laying out the environment to create or to welcome the I don't know, or to welcome walls or whatever, or to play. What do you have to do to make that happen for yourself when you're in an environment where people have the best intentions? But
everybody always has the best intentions.
They always have the best intentions, but they're not working the best for you.
I always feel like it just is what it is. You know, that I very rarely think like, oh, if I had a different director, then I'd really be able to do this thing. I'm like, just because I think for myself as an actor, like maybe I would feel differently if I was like coaching someone and I saw how someone was treating them, and maybe that I would have a different relationship. But when it's just me, I always think the best way that I can do the thing is like, this is how it's supposed to be. Like, this is the thing, this is what it is. And I always just try to like to embody the thing that I'm actually feeling. So if someone's annoying me, to allow myself to be annoyed, and to have the feelings and to express them, and just to try to say the things of like, I'm having a hard time, or like now you've really confused me. You know, and trying to do it like, you know, and knowing that I don't know, I think all the time about this story about Philip Seymour Hoffman that his director told on Capote, where it was the director said that, you know, Philip Seymour Hoffman did one take and was kind of a little bit more like analytical in the way he was, you know, treating the two men on death row. And then the director was like, you know, I think you're saying goodbye to them, like they're going to die, and you had this like personal relationship with them. I think it's like really emotional for Truman. And Philip Seymour Hoffman got really mad at him and was like, no, that's not who he was. It's not who he was. He didn't ever allow the thing, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I'm not doing that. And then they did, and he's like, okay, fine, well, let's just like see what happens. And they did the next take, and Philip Seymour Hoffman was totally emotional.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times actors need to say no in order to say yes, you know. And like what I was saying before is that you get to a lot of openness like through anger. Yeah. And so like sometimes I try to like let myself feel those things with like trying not to be like, I don't want to make people feel bad or anything, but at the same time like trying to be like, I'm doing this because ultimately I want to do the best job for you, and I'm trying to just like let myself feel things so that, because ultimately I want to do this for you, and I want your thing. But I also like, I have to say, like, I am a mid actor, you know, like I'm okay. You know, I think I'm a good teacher. You know, I think I am. I think I know how to like make a space for other people because I know all the things. But, you know, you know, I don't know, like I don't know, like I try to like look for the cracks, like wherever they could be, of like where something will happen that's great. But I guess it's different maybe. What I'm saying is it's different than feeling that you're like the goose that laid the golden egg. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that you're like, you are mistreating the valuable thing, you know, in some way. A person can have that self-possession to do that. I don't think of myself that way. I'm like, let's see what this, you know, B- actor, C+ can eke out today. I'm like, you know.
Let's take your flawed assessment of yourself for a second as true. What then would it take for you to be a great actor?
I think to like be more of an animal. I mean, I just think like by nature, like I like in a way, like as a teacher, like I consider. I don't know if it's valuable for an actor to consider. Oh, you know, I sit, I watch, I think about what might be happening with that person. I wait. You know what I mean? Like I'm good at waiting. You know, like let's not say it now. I don't think that saying it now is going to be helpful. I don't think that is an actor's like most vibrant. I think an actor should just be like, I'm gonna fucking say it now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it now. I'm gonna go over here. I don't think that the actor is about consider. And so that's why I think, you know, so that's why like in some ways it's like, you know, but it's not, but in a lot of ways, like I feel like I'm helping myself by being like truthful about things rather, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I like to see things, you know what I mean? I always just want to see things as they are. I don't want to be making up shit and, you know, being like, I'm a genius, we're all geniuses or whatever. You know, I want to see, because I think when you see the thing as it actually is, then you can do some stuff with it.
And grow.
Yeah, and grow, right, exactly, and grow. I believe in growing, totally. I really believe in it.
Maria Dizzia, this is only part one, please.
Okay, that's...
Please come back on.
Yeah. Yes, I would love to. It's so fun. It's fun to talk about this stuff.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.